Welcome to another episode of Why Real Estate. I'm excited to be with you here today. I've got some information and some opinion and a lot of thoughts regarding the NAR lawsuit settlement. Now, that's the National Association of Realtors, and the opinions or the thoughts that I'm going to express are both for the benefit of real estate agents like myself, as well as consumers, and how will it affect you. I look at that lawsuit, I've read through it, and I believe there are a lot of unintended consequences that are going to result from it. And at the same time, real estate is so cyclical, it's incredible. Here comes this lawsuit where they're essentially saying a seller or a brokerage cannot advertise on the local MLS throughout the country compensation for a buyer's agent. Well, the whole reason that started was back in the 90s, when buyers were feeling discriminated against because they didn't have representation or couldn't have an agent, an advocate in their behalf. And so that's when they started the cooperative compensation plan and started implementing that and offering compensation on the local MLS. So very interesting how we're going in this cycle, which eventually with this new settlement could lead to those same types of issues. Now, I've watched a lot of videos on this. I've began to formulate my own opinion on a lot of things, but some of the main points of that lawsuit I think I want to touch on, with you here today. Sellers' offer of compensation, like I mentioned, will no longer be allowed on the MLS, and no compensation can be listed at all or through any site linked to the MLS. Now, I have my own website. I can advertise compensation there on listings that I have. But the thing about this is it's going to reduce competition for sellers on their home, okay, which means it'll bring less buyers, which then will directly affect the value that they can sell their home for. Smart sellers will take advantage of this in the market and still offer buyer agent compensation. And the better they can get the word out on that without violating the settlement agreement, the more advantageous for them in maximizing the return on the sale of their home. So, and keep in mind, again, this is a settlement that still has to be approved by the courts. These are just a few of my thoughts on it. One of the things as well, and this hardly even affects us in Utah, is that a buyer-broker agreement must be in writing for compensation to exist to a buyer's brokerage. Well, that's already the law here in Utah. Not very relevant. The only difference is that before showing a property beginning this July, a buyer-broker agreement will have to have been signed to show the property. Totally understandable. Everything should be out in the open and very clear for everyone involved. So really hardly has an effect here in Utah, like I mentioned. Another thing that has been interesting is that these changes actually automatically terminate in 7 years, and things will be revisited. And many of you may have heard that there was part of the settlement is that $418 million will be paid by the NAR to those who brought the suit against them. Oddly, the NAR is not required to admit any kind of guilt or admission of wrongdoing whatsoever as part of that settlement. And one of the things I find very interesting is that to get to the settlement, the people who sued, and I'm not saying, I'm not the exact details of why they sued, I'm not going to get into, but the people that sued, in order to even get to the point where they could win or get a settlement, had to use representation of attorneys to do that. So the very result of not having representation potentially for buyers on a home comes from the representation that was provided to the people who brought suit against the NAR. I thought that was an interesting dichotomy that should be noted. One of the things I've seen in many major news outlets, you could name the outlet, is that the result of this lawsuit will mean that homes will become more affordable, as if our government or anyone else can control what the market's going to do. Complete disconnect from reality in that regard. The value of a home has always been and will always be determined by supply and demand. Because a seller may potentially not be paying a buyer's agent commission does not mean they're going to take less money on buying their home. That makes zero sense, just not a possibility. Okay, this is common sense, and anyways, no seller is going to take less. One thing as well that I think it's important to touch on is that unintended consequences is that the poorest among us, aka it could be a first-time home buyer. It could be, the people who have served our country, trying to get a VA loan where they don't have to put any money down. Well, if a seller isn't paying buyer agent commission, potentially, what incentive is there for an agent to represent a buyer like that and to advocate for their needs? Well, there's really not, which unfortunately, does that mean that agents are less likely to represent those buyers? That's hardly fair. It's not right, and potentially could lead to discrimination lawsuits. The consequences and fallout that come from this are staggering. And at the same time, I can, with a clear conscience, say I don't really feel like it's going to affect my business or agents who do produce, who work hard, who do the best they can to provide value are not going to be that affected. Now, will we have to articulate our value and demonstrate our value and bring our value? Yes, but that's always been the case. There's no easy way around this. One thing as well is potentially down the line, sellers could potentially sue because they want to be allowed to offer a buyer agent compensation or buyer broker compensation. And if they can't advertise that, that means they will have less buyers coming to their home, which could reduce the value of their home because it lacks competition. We all know competition drives up price. So anyways, a lot of thoughts right there. And I think it's important that, as a consumer, as a seller of a home or as a buyer, when has it not been a good idea to have good, strong, accurate, value-added representation ever? Okay, and this is definitely something you're going to want to look at, and I highly recommend that you continue to seek out those agents that will bring the most value for you. And feel free, would love to see some comments and answer any questions you have regarding this. Reach out as well, but let's connect, and thank you for listening.